Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Dirty South Security Podcast. We are here today with Dan Cornell. I'm Tony UV. I'm CEO at Versprite. Dan, it's great to see you. Great to touch base with you. How you been?
I can't complain. Every day above ground is a good day, and no, it's been good.
Awesome. Well, today's episode, as we often do on Dirty South Security Podcast, we just dive in. We get dirty. This episode is called Strong Drink, Hard-Hitting Truth and Entrepreneurial Success in Cyber Tech as an Investor and Entrepreneur. Now, we both have sidekicks with us today. First of all, shout out to Versprite for sponsoring the Dirty South Security Podcast. And my go-to for today is going to be an Irish whiskey. It's going to be a single pot, still 15-year age Irish whiskey. Love this guy. This is going to be my sidekick for today's show as we talk about some hard-hitting topics. But what are you rolling with today as your sidekick?
Today, I'm out at the ranch. My wife and I have a little ranch in Blanco, Texas, and so I'm repping some of the locals. We've got the Milam and Green single barrel bourbon. They're just right up Highway 281 from us, and also from just across the street from them, we've got the Real Spirits
Nice.
single barrel whiskey. So trying to represent the local folks, which it's great to see. Great to see. The Hill Country, kind of having its own kind of whiskey culture. The Real Spirits guys started out as more of a brewery, but wanted to show off some of the local swill.
Absolutely. Well, you got me salary. I'm going to definitely put them on my list for my personal stash, but let's dive in. I thought we'd do an opening pour and really talk about, a little bit about your background, just to kind of level set for those that are out there. Dan Cornell, I've known for quite some time, mostly through OWASP. We're both OWASP partakers in the good glory years of OWASP when there was a lot of global collaboration and less drama, but we'll talk about that as a separate podcast. But Dan, you've been an entrepreneur for the majority of your life. I mean, you've been the CTO for the Denim Group for quite some time. And now you're in a position where you're giving advice, you're sharing scar tissue, but tell the world just in a 30-second blurb, like what sort of things drove you to the madness of entrepreneurialism? And, with that, I'll toast you.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, no, and I guess I've always had kind of a bad attitude toward authority, and so in high school and college, I ran a lawn service with a couple buddies of mine, and coming out of undergrad, I went to Trinity University in San Antonio, and coming out, I had job offers like Southwest Research Institute. I think I had one from Exxon, but I'd also started a company with two other guys at the time, and decided to go and do that instead of taking one of those more kind of secure jobs. And that's like my family is that was a shock to my family because they're very much employee focused of like, no, get a good job and stay in there.
Right.
And
401k, pension. Yep.
All that stuff, which is fantastic, but
Right.
wasn't really a good fit for me in the way I looked at it, because this was like the dotcom, go fun times, and I looked at it and said, well, I'm 21 now and I'm broke. If this doesn't work out, I'm going to be like 23 and broke, which is the same thing, but I'm going to have 2 years worth of experiences that I probably wouldn't have got, that I probably wouldn't have had if I'd, been, working at Exxon in the IT shop or something like that.
Sure.
So, that kind of made me jump off into that, venture. And we actually sold that, fairly soon, maybe a year and change after, in September of '99. And then the dot-com run-up, made all this money. I was 23 or 24 and worth like $5 million fake internet dollars.
Right.
I looked real smart at my 5-year high school reunion. I looked less smart, in the months after that, because when I was 23, I had this 5 million fake internet dollars. When I was 24, I had 0 million fake internet dollars, and very close to 0 real dollars as well. And that's actually when we, when I started Denim Group, was kind of at that period of time as well. And then we kind of, again, grew that up. I just suspect we'll talk about some of that stuff, but that was just kind of my history, is, never having a real job.
Well, you've been successful clearly, because, the second leg of the conversation is really also about investment, right? You can't really become a good investor without having some scar tissue and without having built something that has been meaningful, made a lot of money, been successful in the market. So you've done both, and it's really put you in a position where now you're able to see and help others to see where to invest. It's funny you mentioned the dot-com era, because those were some real scar tissue years. I feel like we're kind of at the same, crossroads with the AI era, providing an ample amount of opportunity with innovation, especially as DevSecOps, continues to meet now AI SecOps with more automation and artificial intelligence. So let's go into some key points with that. Before we go into more of your personal entrepreneurial journey, how would you compare today's day and age with how you were starting things in 1999 in the dot-com era?
Right. Well, and it's been wild to see, kind of these kind of waves of innovation or waves of change, and I think, and I think back to the old, graybeards that talk about like, oh, when I took computer science, it was punch cards. I'm sure, man, whatever.
Right.
But I look at it, I was like, oh, well, I used to have to like roll my own Linux kernel and like, and like to get, SSL, you had to like go get like a thought certificate. You had to get like a extension to Apache from like Australia and bring that onshore because you couldn't export the crypto. And so I look at like how like pieced together things were there, and then I look at kind of as the cloud came in, it's like, oh, I don't have to like install this myself. I can just like click on the Amazon thing and spin that up, and and so that's really cool to see kind of the new, like we keep giving like better and bigger building blocks to the people that come after us, right? And that's what I think is a cool thing about just kind of the waves of technology that I've seen. The internet, then mobile, then mobile and cloud around the same time. The real focus on digital transformation stuff, and now with generative AI, it's like the building blocks, you can only build things so tall on punch cards, right? And then if you give people like Linux servers, you can build taller things, especially if you've got like Java and PHP, and then again, you get the cloud and whatnot. And so it's really exciting. I mean, it's not that any of those technologies are without concerns, but the positive aspect of it is I think it gives way better building blocks to people. And I've talked to university professors, and they're over the course of years, and they're like, oh yeah, the kids come in now, and and it's they didn't have to like learn C and C++ and VI like they had kind of built out game frameworks, right? And so their starting point is like, I want to think about how this game works, and I don't have to mess with the underlying stuff, and again, it just gives people the ability to do like bigger and more interesting stuff a lot more quickly and with fewer resources out of pocket. And that's again like sets up an environment where there is the opportunity for a whole lot of innovation, which I think is really cool.
Speaking on innovation, I mean, what would you say is most important at this point in time right now for entrepreneurs? Would you say it's the creativity of innovating something that's needed, or would you say it's something a little bit more practical, like some of the tangible technological skills that, we grew up with in the IT era, and then, it segued into security know-how? In this day and age, as you mentioned, there's the young entrepreneurs are having an idea, but they may not necessarily have the scar tissue. But comparing creativity, ideation to more tangible skills like technical prowess, or let's say even leadership. I mean, you've been a leader for the majority of your career. If you had to kind of put who's on one and who's on two, what would you put first as a criteria for successful entrepreneurship?
And I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to a lot of like being self-accountable, if that makes sense. And I don't think that ever changes, right? A person who's able to say, here's what I'm going to do that, to hold themselves accountable to it, and to have that kind of internal locus of control to say, like, we're going to make progress. We're going to find a way to win, right? And that, arguably, I think that has not changed. Again, whether you're building your startup with punch cards, you're building your startup with ChatGPT, that kind of core ability to like understand what you want and to marshal the resources to get there, and to have the resiliency to deal with all the nonsense along the way. I mean, I think that doesn't change, along the way. When you look at things like technical skills and whatnot, like a really tricky situation we're in is that it is trivial for non-technical people to build something that looks cool and does cool stuff, right? You can say, hey, I want an app that does X, Y, Z, and I want to look like this, and I'll make the design more like this, and add a screen like that is something that again used to take like, okay, well, I'm going to go bang out the PHP code in my VA editor. Now it's something you can talk into WhisperFlow and like Claude Code like slaps it together for you. And so you used to need a lot more technical skills. Like now to create something, you don't need the technical skills, but to operationalize it and to live with it, like you still do kind of need some technical skills. And I think that's a big gap where it's really easy for people to build things that are toys, but the people that are building things that are toys don't necessarily have an understanding of what source code management looks like, what backups look like, what the need to be able to roll back a change or roll forward a change. That there's and again, as the models get better, some of that is not going to be a need, but there's always like what it looks like to actually operationalize something you've built is changing, but hasn't changed as rapidly. And so like a challenge I see is a lot of folks, non-technical folks will say, we're talking to entrepreneurs that, hey, my kid built this thing and it's a workflow management system for our whole deal. Great. Or, hey, we've got this, kind of junior level person, but they really understand AI and they came in and did all this stuff. And I'm like, neat. Checking in a month or two, hey, is that live? Like, nah, it's right. And it's like, okay, well, like, so there's a gap between I've built a thing that is interesting and I've put a thing out in the marketplace that is interesting and I'm able to maintain it over time.
Right.
And that's where, and that's a trick is to figure out like how much of that gap or the model's going to figure out over time, or can you get some like, kind of structure, scaffolding and stuff to make that work, and how much is, and how much is still just going to be like, no, you have to have someone on staff that has at least, some level of an ability to like figure out a web server when it decides it doesn't want to run anymore.
Well, I mean, Dan, you know so many VCs and private equity groups and family offices that maybe are throwing money at different things, right? Would you say the market is still rewarding the race, like the race goers? There's a lot of people that are really, much like the dot-com era, they're trying to fake it till they make it. They're trying to put some of these things together, right, and put a label on it and ship it. I mean, we've both been to Black Hat, we've been to RSA. We know that there is a lot of solutions that are on literally like, stilts, like wooden stilts.
Right.
But now I guess I'm going to flip it to an investor mindset. Where is the investor mindset right now? Are they kind of wary of these sort of quick mock-ups, especially now with AI as a catalyst, or are they not? Are they just really looking to capitalize on just, marketability and the image of something great?
Well, and I can speak, I mean, kind of more for myself, because like an investor, you get kind of people all over the place. Folks, it's funny. There's a group called Alamo Angels in San Antonio, and I've been on their deal review committee. And just because we're in South Texas, a lot of there's a lot of stuff from like Mexico, Central South America, that gets exposed, via that. And I remember, like after one of our meetings, somebody saying like, what was that? Like every deal that we've seen for however long it's like this thing that, but in Central or South America and using AI, right? So it's like PayPal, but this plus AI. And somebody's like, what was that deal that was, whatever from Central America, but using AI? I was like, that's every deal we looked at today, right? Like, and so there's that kind of, like being in a snowstorm, everything just kind of like whites out to there's like no information. It's just like, okay, well, this is, I mean, I guess it's like pitching screenplays. It's like Die Hard, but on a boat, right? And this is like, well, it's this thing, but again, geographically for this particular organization, but then it's from Central South America and it is AI. And so I think like that's a challenge for investors kind of wade through that and to understand like what's the real stuff here. Like one of the things that I look at when I talk to folks is like, hey, if I can rebuild your product, or if I can rebuild 80% of your product over a weekend using Claude Code, like you don't have a moat. Like you've got a neat idea, but like ideas now are, I mean, ideas have always been free or of kind of comparatively low value. And so like it's always been the case where early startups are like, oh, you need to sign this NDA before I tell you that I want to have like eBay for construction machinery. It's like, no, you don't need like, I'm not going to steal your idea, trust me, right?
Yeah.
So there's always been that that kind of push and pull. But now the real challenge is like, hey, if you just have an idea and you ideated that with Claude Code or Codex or whatever, like that's neat. But like, if I had the time or were so inclined, like I've got 80% of your product already done, right? And
Yeah.
so as an investor, what I look for, and again, I'm not claiming to be the world's most sophisticated investor, but like something I look for is like, you've got to have something else that starts to give you a moat, right? And that could be like, hey, I built a thing and I got it in front of people and we've got a lot of eyeballs, right? And those eyeballs have some reason to come back. Okay, well, you've got an audience. Well, that is something that is interesting and that like you can't Claude code yourself an audience, in a weekend, right? A lot of startups are sitting on, or they have the ability to like sit on top of data so they can build their own proprietary data sets that they can use to fine tune models or create their own models, reduce the cost, increase the, whatever. And so that's interesting as well, as to say, okay, well, the vantage point that you sit at, whatever that might be, you get a lot of interesting data that you have access to. So now you can build a proprietary data set and use that for something. Other startups have kind of built-in distribution, like, hey, because of this relationship we have with somebody, we've got a cost of customer acquisition is zero or near zero or something like that. And so that's the real challenge, I think, for startups, is like having an idea and putting something together that's a credible prototype is even less of a step one now than it was before, right?
Right.
Because again, with my $100 a month Claude Code account or whatever it is, like, if I can crap something like this together, like you've got to have something else developed before it makes sense to start to risk resources on, is this group going to be successful? Because why would it be you versus someone else versus someone else? If a bunch of people are working on the same thing. And so like that's a challenge is, for the entrepreneur, I think that's a challenge, is to figure out like what are my ways with low resources to kind of incrementally build some sort of a moat so that I can use that to leverage. And again, I think the challenge for the investor is to look and say, like, hey, is this startup one model release away from being irrelevant, right? Or is this startup one person whose wife's out of town for the weekend or husband's out of town? I speak for my own, my wife would leave town and I'd like, get a 6-pack of Stella and just like, bang away on code and stuff.
Right.
So, like what's the moat that you start to develop? And that's really hard to do with, limited resources you have as a startup founder. And so I think that, again, the ideation makes it great. The challenge is when you say, well, hey, I want to go collect additional resources so that I can start to really push on this, from the investor standpoint, it's like, neat. Well, why are you the person? The constant, again, going as a angel level investor, like so much of the investment you're making is in the entrepreneur, right? Like, does this person have the personality characteristics that are going to put them in a position to be successful? And have they built a set of skills or proprietary knowledge or a track record? What do they bring into the table? But like, the thing that you also then as the entrepreneur have to show up with is like, how have I managed to articulate what I think my moat will ultimately be, and at least start building that, in order to, in order for, is just like a person allocating capital to say like, oh, it's going this way versus that way. Like that's a challenge both to the investor to find like the deals and the people that you think are the ones that are going to be successful at that. Again, as the entrepreneur to figure out like, how do I start to build a bit of a moat, when I don't have a lot of resources. Like that's a hard problem.
Well, I had to take a swig and savor really a lot of great points that you had there. I mean, the fact that you mentioned, that you have to build bigger barriers to entry now with ideation, because anybody can ideate and now create, and that's faster than before. But you said the word audience, and that is something that I think that is a great golden nugget for those listening out there, joining us with their favorite, flask of whiskey, is that, how to build an audience. So I'll throw that back to you, right? How does an entrepreneur listening right now, maybe that they have a couple things on the irons where they're ideating a great, opportunity that's going to solve a problem, but how do you get to building a captive and an interested audience that can lead to a viable, level of go-to-market strategy for that idea that you have? What are some tips that you have for those listeners out there?
Right. And I would say building an audience is the thing that I'm the worst at of those.
Well, this ties in well to the sobering truths part of the outline that I have here. So this is perfect timing.
Right, right. And again, I mean, you got a podcast, you got a set of listeners, like that's an audience, right? I mean, you got social media accounts, like that's an audience, and I mean, but then I'm kind of looking from a product design standpoint to say, what are those network effects? The kind of classic example being a fax machine. If you're the only person with a fax machine, like that's not terribly interesting. If all your best friends have fax machines, and that starts to get more interesting. If everybody you do business with has fax, like that, again, that kind of network effect, and so, that's something that we've looked at before is like, what's a way to say, like, how can you, what are features you can build into your product that encourages them to also involve other contacts of theirs in the product, right? Like, how do you build in that virality? Yeah. I think that's a valuable lens to look through. Again, like from my, just kind of with my background or like kind of the cracks I've found success in, that hasn't necessarily been the case, right? And certain things that I would have said before, like if we look at the way that with like ThreadFix at Denim Group, we started out with that as an open source product. And we were doing different stuff than kind of a typical venture-backed startup might have done with that, right? But it was, for us, what we looked at and said, like, especially at the outset, like, hey, these are some concepts that we think are really interesting of, like, these vulnerabilities, they need to be treated as bugs. They need to be sent to the developers and the tools the developers are using. We want to be able to see that round trip so we can start to gather metrics, right? And releasing that as an open source tool, like, made sense for kind of the strategy we had at the time. And that let us build up an audience, a set of fans that then let us say, like, okay, we've got enough people that are interested in this, enough enterprises are using it where they need, an open source thing is not acceptable to them, so we want an enterprise or a paid model with support. And so that was kind of the transition that we went through, right? But now, if you look at, well, hey, I've got this thing that's open source that's interesting. Well, can that be vibe coded, right? Or can that be, it's, there's less of an imperative as a user of that to say, like, oh, I'm going to join this user community versus saying, like, well, no, this doesn't do exactly what I want, so I'm going to vibe code a thing that does exactly what I want that solves my problem, right? And so, that's I think a real challenge is to figure that out. But again, like, if you look at it through the lens, or if you understand, like, hey, then that's one of the things, like in mentor and startup folks, it's like, what's the most important thing right now, right? Like, there's any number of things that are interesting. There's far too many things that are important. Like, what's the most important thing right now? And so, I mean, my recommendation would be to look at it and to say, if you want to build an audience, to say, like, well, what's the way that we're going to build an audience, right? What are the characteristics of a valuable audience member, right? And so what's the appropriate outreach? Is this, again, like social media to get to a podcast or to get to the Substack? Is this like, hey, I've got a product, but like a key feature of the product is, hey, you can get access to for free to this if you refer 3 other people and they sign up for accounts. Like, looking at the way that if you look at, like, the audience building as a goal of the features that you roll out, like that, I think can help to bring into focus, like, oh, okay, like, you could build this feature 2 different ways. This way is going to, encourage an audience, and that's the thing that we think is going to be our road to value. Let's build it in this way, as opposed to this way, right? And because, again, limited resources and whatnot. And so, this is not the area that I'm the greatest at, but it's something where, like, that intentionality, or of looking at, like, how are the decisions that I'm making? Let's look at those decisions through a lens of audience building, right, or data acquisition, or whatever it might be, whatever your path to value is.
Imagine you're a college grad, or let's say you didn't go to college and you're a 21 to 24 version of yourself now, Dan. How are you feeling about the possibilities? I mean, still being you, right? Still being Dan Cornell, the, defying authority, wants to kind of do your own thing. If you're plucked into this day and age as a young entrepreneur, what sort of things scare the crap out of you, and what sort of things has you pumped?
Right. I mean, I'm arguably still an idiot. I was certainly even more of an idiot, back then. And, I think in a real question I think that I would have as an entry level person coming into the world is like, of this AI stuff, we're somewhere in the Gartner adoption curve between irrational exuberance and total pessimism. We're somewhere on the curve up down, and then the swing that comes out of that. Like a real concern that I get from folks in college that are not necessarily entrepreneurial, but just in general is like, hey, I'm getting a degree and I was coming out as a programmer, and now all the entry level programmer positions.
Yeah.
Like, whether or not it's true, the perception is that those are all going away to be replaced by coding tools or something like that, right? And I would say that's the case for a lot of majors now. I'm looking and saying like, hey, I wanted to come out and I want to do communications and marketing, and I wanted to write copy. Like, oh, okay, well, a lot of those jobs are being sucked up, for better or for worse, whether the output's better or not, and so like that would be a concern that I would have coming out of school is, I've got kind of a limited view of the world. Like, do I have a complete enough picture of what the world looks like and where the world's going in order to like believe that my ideas are out in front of kind of where those trends are going. The flip side of that is what we talked about, like the building blocks are so much bigger, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like and I Trinity University has a VMS venture mentoring service program that I participate in, and so like the last couple of weeks they've got like a summer incubator going on, and I've been hanging out with the students and talking to them about stuff, and the teams that have really started to get traction like have figured out like, oh, hey, here's a platform that lets me build a website with all these features, right? And I can do that a lot faster than I could have otherwise, right? And I don't need to have a co-founder that's a computer science person, at least to get something up and running and whatnot. And so, I think there's a lot of like the building blocks are bigger that, and that's great for ideation and for exploring things and stuff like that. And so, that's a an interesting kind of convergence of situations that that students coming out right now find themselves in between is like, somebody's moving my cheese, right? Are they moving my cheese to somewhere where I'm not ever going to get any cheese, or has the cheese been distributed in a way where like I can use these new tools to get after that?
Yeah. Let's go into the final pour as we wrap this up. I'm going to go ahead and just do one myself right here, but rapid fire questions. Let's try to keep these to be like 15 seconds, or less. What would you say is the, from a human standpoint? I mean, obviously there's a lot of qualities in being an entrepreneur. What human element would look back to your 24-year-old version of yourself and say, hey, develop this further?
I mean, just that, like the ability to just get your jaws in something, and and the ability just to like find a way to win, right?
Yep.
Like I think this idea has merit, and I'm going to just like knock stuff over and rampage around until either I'm dead or until I've made the progress that I wanted to make.
I think that's a very timely suggestion on that. Let me ask you a separate question. Let's talk about exits for a second. Mm-hmm. What sort of things would you put up huge warning signs to an entrepreneur on when it comes to exit strategies? Like, what's the one thing that's like, hey, I wish someone would have told me this, 15, 20 years ago?
It takes a lot longer and is a lot less sure than you might think, right? And I was talking to a buddy of mine who's kind of business has run its course, and this was earlier in the year. He's like, and I'm going to be out by June 1st. I'm like, no, you're not. He's like, no, I wrote it on my whiteboard. I wrote on my vision board. I'm gonna be out by June 1st or whatever. I'm like, no, you're not, right? and we're into and he's not. He's starting to take preliminary meetings, right? And so that's a thing that I learned was like you get to a letter of intent. I mean, well, and I can, I don't know if this is, I'm over 15 seconds. I don't know if this is supposed to be a longer one, but I look at just, when we went through with our minority investment with Wipro at Denham Group, that was originally supposed to be a purchase. we kind of had seats on the bus issues with whatnot. Like you couldn't give us a sales number that we couldn't miss at that time, right? And so as
Yeah.
we went through the diligence process, they went from like, we're going to buy all of you for this valuation to why don't we buy a portion of you for this valuation, right?
Right.
Yeah, and then after that, after that it was agreed upon, then it's a couple months of the diligence and the documents and stuff like that. And similar with the exit that we had, at the end is we got to the letter of intent, and okay, cool. Now we need to go through the diligence and like, hey, we want to see another month's worth of numbers. We want to see another month's worth of numbers. Yeah, there's one more month's worth of numbers, right? And so I mean, maybe if you're Instagram, you get bought over a weekend. Like I've never been near an Instagram thing. In real business world, like it's something you have to be deliberate about in the way that you're making investment decisions in the company and kind of cleaning up your books to get ready. So, hey, can we go through a diligence process? All the technical due diligence, all the legal stuff. Like it pays to be careful and deliberate about that. And even in an environment where you're careful and deliberate, like the deal's going to change along the way, and the deal's not guaranteed to close. And that's that's a real risk. I mean, I know it was for me, where I was just like, make the pressure go away. I'll take whatever change you want. I just want this to be over with. Like going into an exit process with that mindset is, your best case scenario is you're going to get a bad outcome. So.
Where do you think, another rapid fire question, and I appreciate the longer version of the answer on that one, but the valuations today, do you feel that they're more advantageous for the buyer or the seller, or equal, or it depends?
The problem I see, and it is, I think the way that companies get valued right now forces them into a VC like road that they're going to be on that is not right for every entrepreneur, if that makes sense. And so it's great if you can get a tremendous valuation when you get an investment round, but that investor needs to see they want to see 10x to 100x as an outcome, right? And they're willing to have your deal fail as long as one of the other 10 deals they have going succeeds, right? And so as an entrepreneur, it's important to know what your goal is, right? And I look, and again, talking to young people, it's like, no, I want to build a unicorn, and I'm blah, 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 I'm going to take the world by storm. Like, that's a fine thing for a young man or a young woman to want, right? When we were going through our exit at Denim Group, I was married and no kids, but established. And I was like, no, I need an amount of money so that I can take care of my family and be comfortable for the rest of my life, right? And I don't need $1 billion because I'm, slightly lower, lower maintenance than that, right? And so that's the thing for an entrepreneur to understand. Like, if you want to take that valuation, like there's a next step and a next step and a next step after that, right? And your goal might be, I need to land at this level and take care of my family. And if you're doing that, you need to be conscious of how, when you look at valuations and when you take money, that's not, I mean, I guess with an exit, like, take the exit, if whatever they wire to your account, you get to keep, that's great. But like, if you're looking at these valuations along the way, they're putting you on a track that you may not want to be on, giving their tolerance for failure along the way.
Yeah. That's a great point. I'm going to ask this last question before we part. Post exit, right? Check in hand, you've kind of walked away from the business, or maybe you have just like more of a supportive role versus an active, leadership role. What's the hardest thing to get accustomed to post an exit? It could be, anything.
It's for me, and I had the advantage, call it an advantage, of doing this when I was 23 the first time, but it's that loss of identity, right? I mean, I ran Denim Group for just under 20 years, right? Yep. And I was the founder, I was the CTO, right? I went to OWASP stuff, and I was talking at conferences and flying around the world, and hey, we'll bring on our CTO, and he's going to talk roadmap with you and whatnot, right? So I went from being the founder, the CTO, the kind of go-to guy for a certain set of questions, and then afterward, I was the vice president of, we had to give this guy a title, right? Which is fine, right? Yeah. And I mean, it's not a bad thing, but it's it surprised me how much that had an impact on kind of the way that I viewed myself and my role and things like that. Was
Yeah.
I went from being a main character, a main character of what was going on around, to like a bit character in a
Yes.
much bigger story that was going on, right?
Right.
And and again, like on reflection, it's like, that's fine. And I transitioned, I did my stuff, I supported people, transitioned out of the business. But like, especially when I was 23, 24, thought I had all this money, didn't have that money. Again, the second time around, it wasn't as bad, or I had a greater level of maturity, which helped me deal with the situation the second time around a lot better than I did the first time around. But that it's still that ego impact of, it's a big difference between the founder and the CXO to me and the vice president of, you pick a title, we don't care.
That's a sobering take, and I gotta respect that, especially for the Dirty Cybersecurity podcast, where we try to give sobering takes. This was a great episode with you, Dan. I think you dropped a lot of golden nuggets. Toast to you. Appreciate the opportunity to share a good amount of years. As we've both journeyed in security and now going into a new era of AI and quantum and God knows what else in the future. But great to see you as always, and here's to ongoing prosperity to you and to all of our listeners and watchers out there.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me on. This is a lot of fun. I love talking about this stuff. And again, like if it's, hopefully it's helpful to someone. I made a whole lot of mistakes, and we always tried to like find new and interesting mistakes to make and not remake the old ones. And so if somebody can learn from my mistakes, like that's great. It's bigger building blocks for the people who come behind.
Absolutely. Well, cheers, Dan.
Cheers.